Hello, I'm Rao Mulpuri, and along with my colleagues, over the last 12 years, we've been building View to transform the day-to-day window. The smart window controls heat and glare, eliminates blinds and shades, and provides view and natural light all the time. Because we have a highly connected system, we're able to bring a whole host of smart building applications. For example, this video you're watching is coming to you through the View Smart Display, which is a high-definition display that's installed right into the window. Also on this platform, we have a sensor array that has a number of environmental sensors, and these can be used in order to control the environment precisely for the health and wellness of the people. These new applications transform buildings into living spaces that help us engage, interact, and communicate with each other. The buildings will be transformed into high-speed 5G cell towers with complete wireless coverage. Now that the blinds are lifted, these humanized spaces will keep us entertained while keeping us connected to natural light and views of the outdoors. And we're just getting started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Realcomm Live. Today, we have got a phenomenal topic. My one-word description for today is important. We're going to be looking at environmental and sustainability. We're going to focus on the E part of ESG. And we've got an environmental and sustainability forum coming up at our conference in June. And this is kind of the sneak preview of what we're going to be talking about. So Realcomm has been on this topic, specifically the E part, since the inception. I remember sitting in New York City 5 years ago, looking up at a building, all the lights are on, only a couple people in the building doing the cleaning. And I just wondered, why not leave those lights off, right? Why not keep them off? I was always taught when you leave the room, turn off the lights. And that was really the first exposure. And through the years, we've gone through various ups and downs on the energy side, the energy conservation side. It has come in and out of fashion probably 3 times, maybe even 4 in my career. My hope is this time it sticks. For 20 plus years, we've been using a carrot. And now I think we're going to be using a stick a little bit more as we're seeing more and more regulations. So we've got 3 really phenomenal guests today. We've got Clayton Ulrich, SVP, Operations Engineering Sustainability for Hines, Maureen Ehrenberg, CEO, Skyre IBE, and Michael Daschle, SVP, Sustainability for Brookfield Properties. I mean, collectively, with their experience, they have got millions and millions of square feet under their purview, and really that this topic of keeping these buildings more environmentally sound is on their radar screen. So let's bring on our guests and get into this great conversation. Hello, everybody. How are you?
Great.
Great.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Good to see you. I was trying to calculate in my head how many square feet. I mean, Maureen, you were with CBRE and JLL and WeWork, and then Clayton with Hines, and Mike, your portfolio is massive. So I was trying to do the math, how many square feet? I just said a lot. So you don't have to deal with these things just at one or one off. I mean, you have to deal with this topic at scale, right? And that's a whole different story. So before we get started, I'd just like to go around and have each one of you give a little background, led you to this day, to this conversation on environmental and sustainability as it relates to the built environment. Clayton, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Jim, I've been working with the built environment and real estate for right at 50 years now, 48 years with Hines, and I grew up with deep roots in Hines Engineering Group. And over the years, I've had a variety of expanding roles with Hines, and about 5 to 6 years ago, they asked me if it was a logical connection between me and sustainability before we really all accepted ESG. And I've always enjoyed making better buildings, which is kind of the roots of Jerry Hines. And so it was a natural fit to really take on the E in ESG. And we also have a global head of ESG that helps the firm really pull together all the efforts that goes on in Hines for ESG. So we have a global head of ESG, but I own the E in ESG for Hines and having a lot of fun doing it.
It makes an awful lot of sense. Again, congratulations on an incredible career. Not many people can say almost 50 years, so congratulations. Maureen, how did you get here?
Well, I started as a commercial analyst, and I worked with all the different leases in retail, industrial, and office for Belcor. And so doing the billings, working with the different regional groups, the energy, particularly if it was being captured and cammed for the common areas, you could just see, the tenants were pushing back, trying to understand why costs were so different. And then also just realizing the difference in the cost, whether it was regionally, whether it was by property type or even by the type of inefficiency that some of the buildings had and the sensitivity to price. And then as my career went on, whether it was leasing and building assets like working with Prudential and working for Zell, there's a huge sensitivity to that ultimate cost. And then, of course, footload, the lake footload, and all these other the operating pieces as well. So ultimately, getting into facilities and getting on the occupier side and really better understanding the appetite for investment in energy, the importance of reduction, and then the trends over the last 10 years. Jim, you talk about the fits and starts. The biggest issue is it can't be a trend. It can't be a fit and start any longer, just given the goals we've got for the environment. So it's such a really a foundational element of anybody who's operating real estate. And for us, the ESG is very important. And of course, Realcomm and the digital piece is the way we're all going to get there.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a second, but you're absolutely right. I mean, all these great goals and objectives, but you're not getting to E without tech. You're just not. Innovation that will be applied to these buildings is what's going to help solve this problem. Mike, Brookfield, big company, lots of assets. Big lift.
It is. So
you sleep.
I try. So yeah, I've been with Brookfield now for almost 5 years. Commercial real estate for just over 8 years. Most of my commercial real estate experience has been focused on the asset management side, actually, kind of running the business strategy and planning for individual properties. At Brookfield, obviously, doing that gives the opportunity to do it at scale. And so, a few years after I had been doing asset management for about half of our New York City office portfolio, our asset management lead and regional lead basically came to me and said, look, we're getting so much attention from investors and tenants on ESG, and we don't really have anyone who's specifically focused on managing our ESG strategy. So she offered me the opportunity to start this brand new role at the time. And my first kind of task was to put together an ESG business plan, similar to how we do asset management business plans for these properties, to lay out specific projects, tie some metrics to them, present it right alongside of the financial business plan. And that really led to some involvement into some renewable electricity deals. We started scaling up some of the strategy that we've employed here in New York across the U.S. And that kind of U.S. energy-wide perspective brought me now to the perspective where I'm leading sustainability for Brookfield's U.S. office portfolio, which is about 100 office properties across many of the major markets in the U.S. So, that's the approach I'm focused on right now, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, and thank you. And the downside of this heavy lift of yours, all of yours, the upside is if you do figure it out at scale, then we got real shot at this thing, right?
Exactly.
And what's amazing to me, I mean, I've known probably for 15 years at least that us buildings have spent 40 to 45% of the U.S. energy bill, right? I mean, powering these buildings is and it's not automobiles. I mean, I know all the attention focused on cars, and I get it. We should do that as well. But why do you think, and anybody take a stab at this, why do you think we've ignored this for so long? I mean, we're the big user of energy, which contributes to this global warming and climate issue problem. We'll start with Maureen. Maureen, why have we ignored this for so long?
In my experience, different groups have made it a priority a lot longer than others have. But yet, when you look on the whole, it's probably the 80-20 rule, unfortunately. But there have been groups that for years and years have been very, very committed to the whole area of sustainability and energy reduction. But when you start looking at even different property management groups, and they're working as an agent for the owner, and they don't even realize the impact it can have on value. When someone was looking even several years ago, if someone realized that a property was being run so inefficiently or a complex was being run that way, that was a great opportunity for someone who is more aware to come in and buy it at a lower price, knowing the savings that they could be driving with some of these initiatives. So I do think part of it is just, unfortunately, a lack of true understanding of the topic and the value add it can have, versus the look at, well, we need some capital up front. I'm not really sure there's an ROI for me. And unless I get a 2-year payback, I'm not going to put that money in because my hold period is short. So depending on, I would say, maybe the occupiers, the ones that are like living in the buildings and paying the bills, some of them have paid a little bit more attention, but also some of the top of the line property management companies of owners have had it on the radar for a long time.
Mike, Clayton, anything you want to add to that?
I think one of the interesting things is that I think probably since 2015, like Paris Agreement, that has been one of these catalysts across the market to draw renewed attention to it. I would agree with what Maureen was saying about a certain amount of the market who's very focused on going in and adding value through energy efficiency, saving the owners money, saving tenant occupiers money. Now there seems to be much more of a global coalition across this theme of mitigating the impact of climate change, and I think that's kind of drawn a renewed interest to a lot of these issues that have been there for a while. But now, I think the building sector in particular is one where we don't necessarily have the same challenges like maybe long haul shipping or aviation in terms of trying to get to net zero. Like, we've got proven technologies that we can roll out at scale, and now it's a question of just kind of getting everyone on board.
Right. Clayton?
Yeah, Jim, working for a company that was founded by a degreed engineer, I have to say we've never let up. Mr. Hines recognized it was a business value add, and candidly a service back to our tenants and our occupants. And so we've been at it steady Eddie for well over 50 years. I think there's a couple of factors here. I think you do reach a point where you've done what you can do with what you have at a building, and it kind of plateaus. And the more efficient you run the building, the harder it is to find what else you can do. But there is always something else. I think our bigger problem is the gap between the leaders, the people that are doing this, they understand the business case, and the people that aren't doing it. And unfortunately, by virtue of leaders, right? Leaders is not 50% of the industry. Leaders is a much smaller segment of the industry. And I think for the world and society, I think our true opportunity is finding some way to expand the people that are doing it. And I think it's got to be part of the direction we're going and how we're going to get there.
Well, and then even within the Class A group, there's a small percentage of leaders don't even talk about the B's and the C's, who've got 30-year-old air conditioners hanging out of the windows. That you're right. I mean, we need leadership in all various segments of our industry. So 40 to 45% is the number that's thrown around. And, to me, just kind of looking at a building, the big heavy load HVAC seems to be the biggest contributor. And then, on the lighting and others. Let's talk about some of the things that are, and expand upon this, this idea. Maureen, what are the big offenders? Why do we use so much energy in buildings?
Yeah, well, some of it is just the basic design. So, we had constant air volume systems that were actually, some of the older buildings that they can be pretty efficient. The problem is that when you start designing space and you don't have VAV boxes, you don't have some of those internal features, that all of a sudden your building becomes obsolete or antiquated. And there hasn't been a long-term vision on how the HVAC, because if you think about, unless it's one enormous tenant or a group of very large tenants, you have so many smaller tenants with different lease expiration times. Then if you think of ownership, very often ownership changes over a period of time. It just kind of becomes a cluster, and you've got to take a step back and really figure out what you want to do.
I mean, Michael, a lot of your buildings, New York City, I mean, 4 people come in on a Saturday afternoon and you got to light up the whole floor, right? I mean,
yeah, I was going to mention exactly that. I mean, some of these are like lease obligation driven, and some of it's like we just don't have the information sometimes until we put in like occupancy sensing technology to be able to go back to the tenant and be like, you're running this per our lease obligation, but exactly what you're saying, Jim, there were 3 people on the floor, or there was no one on the floor.
Right.
We had it automatically scheduled because that was a lease obligation. So maybe we need to take a look at how the leases are done and take a look at the technology we have in the building to actually inform us.
Well, and vice versa. You only need a little bit of space on a Saturday, and because of the way it's set up, you call and say, "Hey, I'm going to need the after hours air." And it's like, woof, my entire space, 6 floors are all running, right? And they're going to run for 4 hours, whether you like it or not. And then also, There are some
Yeah.
agreements, even with the unions, where there's expectation on when equipment goes on and when it goes off. So it really is going to take a coalition, even, with some of the operators, to kind of align on what's fair, what's right. Again, you could address it with automation. So it's huge opportunity, but that inefficiency and that cost, and keep in mind, we're talking about energy right now, but that carbon piece, the embodied carbon, is also going to come into play here, because the more you can recycle, the better. But that means keeping a lot of the existing walls where they are, not demolishing everything constantly and putting it in landfill. So it's just being really smart and strategic about how you're planning your iterations.
Yep.
But also, Jim, I think one of the good things is I think the data is going to get refined and it's going to change. I think we're going to, and I don't know this, but I think we're going to find that the estimates are high on the building side. I think BOMA's already saying that they're not right, that they're overestimated. It'll be interesting to see that. And I also think we need to think about the fact that, the life of buildings is probably way more than many other things in our society, and I can tell you, when I started doing this, electricity was 2 cents a kilowatt hour and gas was 50 cents an MCF, and the economics look totally different when electricity goes to $1 a kilowatt hour. And so I think we ought to be careful that we're not doing a good job, but the economics are changing on us, and all of us are for-profit businesses, right? And so while we can do better when longer paybacks, and I think that's going to be some of the benefits of the carbon world, I think we're going to have return on investment and carbon on investment. We're going to put the two of those together and do things we couldn't do in the past. But I also think that the picture's changed a lot. When you're trying to do a return on something at 2 cents a kilowatt hour versus 10 or 15 or 20, that economics looks different. And look, all of us have investors that are looking for a return, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to balance all this for them, help society, help our world, but do it in a way that still is good business.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of arguments and discussions going on that, the two sides of the fiduciary responsibility, the financial and the ESG, sometimes they're not totally aligned, and then they actually create tension, right? And that's got to get figured out. I hope you, if you get a chance on Realcomm Live, go up to YouTube. I think it was last week or the week before, we did a phenomenal Realcomm Live on low voltage, and we probably had 6, 7 of the top low voltage people, literally, if not the country, maybe even the world. And, first people think low voltage, the first application is going to be lighting, and it is, but these folks are doing some stuff with motors. And I have been pushing this. These are a lot of my people. I've been thinking about low voltage, as an architecture in a building for probably 25 years now. There's some real opportunities here, and we're going to be talking about low voltage a lot at the conference. We have been for the last couple of years, but we're really going to step it up this year, because I think it's one of the tools that you folks can use. But that's where we really got to, have the departments start to overlap each other and talking to each other. ESG, talking to IT, talking to engineering. I mean, this is an all hands on deck kind of situation. But there are, you said earlier, Michael, there's some great tools out there that we've got at our disposal. Let's take a brief break and hear from one of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to have a conversation on what we're going to be talking about in June at the forum. Don't want to miss this. We'll be right back.
Everything in real estate accounts payable has been automated, except invoice coding. Coding invoices for approval and payment still relies on manual data entry. It's slow, error-prone, and just not scalable. Predict AP was founded by real estate insiders to automate invoice coding. They tried everything else first, OCR, outsourcing, but every solution fell short of actual coding. Predict AP fully automates invoice coding for real estate companies. Unlike other solutions, Predict AP provides fully coded invoices ready for your existing automated AP workflows. It works with your current AP automation system, so you can keep the workflow you already trust. Your AP team can review the coded invoices, revise or accept our predictions, and send to your AP workflow with one click. Get your AP team out of the data entry business and onto higher value work. Automate invoice coding with Predict AP.
That little sponsor commercial made me think, well, at least we've gotten rid of some paper and some file cabinets over the years. Well, the only problem is we probably replaced them with a data center that's eating up some electricity. So we got to keep our eyes on this topic. Before we get to the forum and the topics we're going to be covering, one of the questions I was thinking about before and had on my list to ask you was, you got real estate on one side, the space, you got technology as a tool on the other side, but in the middle of all this, you got people. And I've been around the industry long enough to know how siloed commercial and corporate, and the tenant side, how siloed organizations can be, especially when you bring the tenant into the conversation, because they've got their own siloed organization. So, Clayton, let's start with you. How do we break down the silos as it relates to solving this sustainability issue? Especially, when you start talking about from a smart standpoint, from a technology standpoint, lots of people got to be involved. Have you done some things at Hines that have brought people together to collectively work on this, or are you still feeling some of the pain of each person trying to solve the problem on their own?
Jim, we created a digital strategy office for Hines, and IT, business process, and corporate data and analytics sits underneath that. And I'm currently looking for a property technology lead, where I define property technology as the culmination of hardware and software that creates a service for the occupant or the building that stays with the building, much like a utility when the building transacts. And I think that's the path. I think you're exactly right. We've reached a point where silos don't work. In the old days, they did, because you could say, oh, that's accounting, that's engineering, that's IT. And I think there's the challenges internally with the process, and then I think there's the challenges externally with the other stakeholders. And I hope that this is going to drive to really recognize the cooperative need between the occupants, the tenants, and the building, because we got to do better there. Yeah. I don't think it's green leases. I think green leases is a hammer. I think this is in everybody's best interest. And what we're going to see is, we're going to see this process that we're going to go through over the years and long years ahead are going to create some alignment where tenants are going to need us to be better at managing the building and managing their space. Investors are going to need us to be better, because we're all going to become accountable. And I think if you look at Local Law 97 in New York, it's the perfect example, right? They don't care who consumed the energy. They don't care who owned the building. If you don't meet their thresholds, you get a fine, and no one wins. And so we're going to assess that money and then figure out how we use that money productively to create a better building, as opposed to paying a fine. So I think we're on our way.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I think I'm most proud of, is that in the Realcomm community, we bring all the stakeholders. So the tenant, the occupier, the landlord, the integrator, the manufacturer. You can't all, and we've been trying to break down silos ourselves within the industry, because you can't have, one person go to one conference and then another one goes to another, and then you got to get all these people in the same room and figure this out cross departments, cross organizations. Yep.
And Jim, you may remember we did a session on carbon a few years ago at Realcomm. It was the first time some of those people had heard about it. And we had a guy in there that I really respect a lot that wanted to debate it. And I respected him so much I had to understand why we see it differently. And there were some clear reasons of our global investors, our European investors, our tenants and his tenants. And it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be okay.
You're not getting to this finish line without debate and disagreement. I'm sorry. You have 100 years of buildings, that we have to unwind into a new trajectory. It's not going to be easy. It's just not. Mike, how about your organizational constraints? How do you deal with them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is to underscore the communication between, manager and occupier, like Clayton was saying. I mean, there have been situations where we know we can have an outsized impact on the emissions from a building through renewable energy procurement, for example. And we'd come to find out that one of our tenants has already bought, RECs for their entire corporate office across the country. Yep. And so, had we kind of been more proactive in our plans in terms of getting out in front of them and saying, hey, we're going to buy, renewable power for this building. You guys don't have to. We're going to provide that as a service to this building. And that would have been really, helpful, obviously, for the tenant. But then globally, I think, back to the net zero effort, a global commitment to a net zero target has also started to break down a lot of those silos. I think more than ever now, across this vast, Brookfield ecosystem, for example, we're talking across regions, across asset types, sharing best practices. I think that's going to be critical no matter where you are, because if you're going to have that leverage scale, you have to be able to communicate across all those boundaries that have typically prevented it.
That's what we do. We scrape the globe looking for best practices. When we find them, we put them on stages, let everybody hear it, and then debate, and then move forward. That's the goal. Maureen, you've been with a lot of big organizations. Have you been able to beat up the silos?
Well, it's funny. It's almost like forces of nature has done it for us. And it really starts with everything today really seems to really be around human centric, whether it's design around how people use the space, how they work in the space, how they own the space, and what their needs are. And so when you start with looking at why is this building here and who is using it and who's consuming the space, what makes them productive, you start to have to integrate all of those different areas because you're coming up with different solutions. And I mean, the name of the game right now, it's frictionless, it's fluid, it's flexibility, agility, and that whole dynamic nature is being fueled by all the technology. So I think it's the force of technology, the force of this concept of human nature, and even some of the things we have to grapple with are the fact that the more we, like for example, reduce the amount of outdoor air we're taking in to keep control and keep the air controlled at a comfort level, right, at a certain price, we learn that cognitive function suffers. And so the more fresh air we take in, and I think you look at JPMC's new tower, in New York, it's fabulous. And it's all designed around human-centric design and productivity. And it's teaching us a new paradigm in which to look at real estate and the way we manage our energy.
But going back to your point solution, you can't take 100 point solutions without a strategy and have success, right?
No, that's the new blueprint, right? It's a new blueprint. Like when we think of the old blueprints and sepias, it's very much, okay, this is what's as built, here's my MEPs. But now when you're looking at that, that's where you have to start looking at the touch points, the experience that different stakeholders have in that. And how are you kind of curating the space and the different experiences? Look at your experience right now, for example, right? And so that really sets a new blueprint, which is a dynamic one that has different elements than that static one-dimensional that we were used to looking at.
And that's another level of organizational integration through the construction process. There's more organizations, it gets complicated. Clayton, you had something?
Yeah, one of the things the industry is going to need is to simplify this. I mean, it's a humongous topic. It's extremely complex. It's got all these tentacles, and we're fortunate, right? We're fortunate. We got the resources, we got the ownerships backing, we got investors and tenants that care, and so it's a struggle for us to get our arms around it and consume it. But if you don't have these resources, it's impossible. And so one of the things that we could do for the industry over time is try to simplify it and force it to be simpler than its desire to want to be more and more complex.
Well, it's leaders like you. That's why, you got 10 jobs already. You find the time to come on Realcomm Live. You find time to volunteer your time for the conference. I mean, you're paving. It's our community and all of you, that are paving the way for this, to make it easier for the next folks, because unless you have resources, unless you have commitments, it doesn't get done. Smaller companies just can't do this. So again, thank you to all of you. So we're going to run out of time real quick. 30 seconds answer. Clayton, what's the one topic we've got to cover at the Sustainability Forum? Make it worth its time. What's the one that just floats to the top for you?
This starts with where you are and data. Accurate, credible data to anchor yourself on, because you're going to have to report your progress. If you start off without a sound foundation, you're not going to be able to manage it. And there's not an industry solution. There's people that think there's an industry solution, but there is not.
Yeah, and we've been having some big conversations on this offline, how hard it is to even just get some basic, consistent data. It's not as easy as people think, and it's 2023. Mike, what's number one for you?
Yeah, I would echo the standardized, actionable data that you can carry forward and communicate to anyone you need to. I mean, working on a big standardization project with Oscar, for example, where we're just trying to define the terms and be able to integrate that into all the technology that we can do to share our progress going forward. And I think it's that actionable data that you can see throughout the.
And I'm glad to hear the word. Lisa and all of her predecessors have worked hard at Oscar to try to find some real solid ground on the standards, and I think ESG is probably a great place to have that happen. Maureen?
I think momentum and velocity. So I saw a lot of surveys recently that people are exhausted. They're absolutely exhausted over this topic already, and we're just getting going. And so We're just going. And so the problem is this time has got to be different because, like you said, it fits and starts with sustainability and energy. And then all of a sudden, I saw a survey the other day. A bunch of people said, well, okay, we think this is a passé topic. Can't be a passé topic if we've got the 2050 goals, the 2030 goals. So how is it different this time that the velocity and the commitment and people's understanding of this fact that this is a global issue, it's a domestic issue, why and how are we tackling it, and why is it going to?
Well, I mean, there's 40 to 45%. That's not going away. The energy consumption, the inefficiencies of the buildings. Walk in any building, you can see it. You're not getting over the finish line without technology. We'll see. I mean, we'll see the response to this forum. I mean, we are going to laser in on the problem, laser in on the solution. We're bringing case studies to the forefront. We're going to provide some answers. And if nobody shows up, you got an answer. I'm hoping that's not the case, but we're going to do our best. That's all we can do. Let's do our best to get smart people like you and get these answers on the table, and hopefully people will jump in. So unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much to all of you. I know how busy your schedules are, and for you to take a half hour to get this done today, I really appreciate it. And all your work with the Sustainability Forum. It's looking like it's going to be a great program. And again, I can't thank you enough. So
thank you, Jim.
Have a great day. Great weekend. Take care.
You too. Bye, everybody.
All right, with that, let's bring on one of my favorite parts of Realcomm Live, the news. There we are, Howard. So much going on. I mean, it's amazing. This stuff seems to be increasing daily, and I don't know how you keep up with it, but you seem to find the right articles to show us each and every week.
Well, I hope we got the right ones this week. I mean, you're right. There's a lot going on. And
all right, I'm going to get out of here.
But I just want to, I want to take a moment and thank you, Jim, but thank you, Maureen, Clayton, Michael. You guys have been, giving your time, your energy. Thank you for all your contributions, not only to our inaugural Environmental Sustainability Forum, which, by the way, for our listeners, is going to be held the afternoon of June 13th. It's our pre-conference day, the day before Realcomm IBCon actually kicks off at Caesars in Las Vegas. And thank you all for joining us here today. This was a great show, an important show. So I'll get on to the news. So we do a weekly briefing that goes out every Thursday morning. If for any reason you don't see it in your inbox, just go to realcomm.com and click on news. You can subscribe there. So today's lead story is by Rob Stark. He's a senior executive director for strategy and operations at MAP, which is one of the leading property managers in London. It's entitled The Smart Building Revolution. So I really like the way Rob characterizes smart buildings. And he says quite eloquently, I would add, the smart building should automate and integrate all aspects of energy management, lighting, HVAC, and with the right technology, provide a high degree of flexibility and personalization for the occupants with things like frictionless access and seamless wayfinding, and not to forget that it must have things like ubiquitous connectivity. And if it's done right, these features in the smartest buildings are going to go virtually unnoticed by the user because it's either predicted or provided their needs on demand. Now, Rob further delves into the data and analytic requirements and various presentation layers, as well as IoT and cyber that need to come together in a comprehensive smart building strategy. So great article. Really encourage you to read it. Thank you, Rob, for this fantastic story. Second, PAX Realcomm IBCon attendees, you're probably familiar with our Smart Building Best Practice Showcase that we do at the conference, where we bring in 30 plus real estate execs representing some of the most iconic smart building projects from around the world, where they can mix with attendees in a very informal yet highly interactive poster type session. So this week we're highlighting one of these projects, developer Strategic Property Partners, and their project Water Street, Tampa. It's Florida's first smart district. It is a connected urban multi-use project on the waterfront spanning 56 acres with 9 million square feet, new commercial, residential, educational, entertainment, cultural, and retail space. It's complete with a state-of-the-art communications infrastructure with publicly accessible 5G, Wi-Fi, mobile services platform for reserving everything from parking to personal services and amenities. So check out this important project. Next, the fourth annual 2023 VTS Global Landlord Report highlights that 62% of landlords don't have the tools to understand their tenants' utilization, even though they're pushing to prioritize tenant retention and experience. So VTS surveyed hundreds of industry leaders worldwide and found out that as new office demand continues to falter. 87% of the landlords say that for 2023, they're going to be much more concerned with retaining existing tenants than acquiring new ones. So over half reported daily tenant occupancy rates under 30%. So strengthening existing tenant relationships and investing in the technology to get employees back to workplaces will be key to success. Nearly all reported that they need to create a hospitality-like experience for their buildings, for their tenants. The problem is that less than half have the tools to really understand in real time how tenants are actually using the space and amenities. So just food for thought. This is a good read. Finally, an unsettling observation on the state of our future cyber preparedness. So according to a recent Gartner report, today's cyber professionals are facing unsustainable levels of stress, and this could lead many to pursue jobs outside the sector. So Gartner's predicting that nearly half cybersecurity pros may change their jobs by 2025, and the resulting talent churn can make it really difficult to recruit and retain adequate security force. So businesses, I think, as a result, need to be more proactive, really need to up their game with formal risk management programs, get proactive, and instead of thinking that this is not going to happen to them, and they may need to use managed security service providers as part of their strategy. So this is one we can't afford to ignore. So that was just a few of this week's highlights.
Yeah, that last story just sends chills up my spine because I mean we've been active roles in the Real Estate Cyber Consortium now for 5-6 years, right from the very beginning, and we know the problem. We know how important it is, and to hear that stress is causing that kind of job force reduction is we got to figure this one out. We have no option.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem is a lot of companies just aren't paying attention to it, so they're burdening their cyber teams, and not giving them tools they need to proactively face it head on.
Great story. Glad you put that one on the top.
Yeah,
great job. All right. So listen, you have a great weekend, and Howard, you always do a great job. So before we talk about next week's show, let's hear from our final sponsor, and then I'll tell you what we're up to next week.
SkySpark is an analytics platform that automatically analyzes data from automation systems, meters, sensors, and other smart devices in order to identify issues, faults, trends, correlations, and opportunities for operational improvements and cost reduction. SkySpark works with data of all types, whether it be live data from automation systems, smart meters, web services, or historical data from CSV files and databases. SkySpark can also be used in a wide variety of applications, including energy and resource management and reporting, monitoring-based commissioning, equipment fault detection, energy analysis, load profiling, facility benchmarking, and asset performance tracking. Visit skyfoundry.com today and start finding what matters.
All right. Well, before we get on to next week, just a big shout out, big thank you to our three guests, Maureen, Mike, and Clayton. 3 superstars. We have 2 other folks who are on the advisory panel, but we're not able to make it today. And thank you to them as well for all of their work on the forum that's coming up in June. Also, thank you to our sponsors and to our great Realcomm team to put this on each week. So next week, topic near and dear to my heart, the intelligent building journey from the standpoint of the boot camp. We do a boot camp at Realcomm and IBCon every year. I think it's must be more than 10 years, run by the Intelligent Buildings folks. And next week, we got Rob Murchison, the co-founder of Intelligent Buildings, and Lee Schoenberg, the VP of Client Services at Intelligent Buildings. And we're going to give us a really good overview on what we expect to see this year. That event evolves. The smart building journey continues to change and evolve, and they're staying right on it. And for those people who are just getting in, they provide a great foundation to better understand and move forward on smart buildings. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to all for watching. Have a great day, great weekend. We'll see you next week. Be well.